conscience is your guide with the IRS, but a lot of that is deductible. So they say. Now, I'll make the introduction of our next guest short so he can have a little time to talk to you. I think many of you know Phil Eisenberg. He's chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. And although in the past he has been a Sacramento City Council member, mayor of Sacramento, assembly member, and government relations practitioner, but for the past 5 years, he has been deeply immersed in finding a vision and a plan for the Delta. Today, he will be next leaving us to go to the Delta Stewardship Council, but today he will discuss, I think it's the latest Delta plan. Thanks for coming, Phil. And thank you for supporting the foundation. He's a great supporter of Aquafornia.com. Go to that every morning for your news stories.
Thank you, Rita. I am a great fan of Aquafornia. If any of you don't use it, you're just out of the play. It is the one place in California where you can assemble news stories, both statewide, some national, and regional. But more importantly, you pick up the startling opinions of this wild collection of known and anonymous people called bloggers who are increasingly driving political debate since, you know, the news cycle now is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they manage to digest it for you, allow you to read what you need to read. And it's a remarkable benefit to people like me. I consider myself an officious intermeddler in water policy. By the way, that's actually a legal terminology. I'm operating under color of title. And if you don't stay up with the gossip, you truly do not understand what's going on. So, for example, Craig Wilson, the Delta Water Master, looks like a Cocker Spaniel, talks like a responsible lawyer, which is what he is. He's sitting there. But if you didn't read Aquafornia, you would not know in advance what revolutionary thing he has said in his very deceptively honest, straightforward, and soft-spoken way. That's what it tells you. So just a notion. And as you assess the benefit of the Water Foundation by coming to events like this, I hope you pay attention to Aquafornia because it is one of the glues that holds the discussion together. Not that the discussion is always happy in the water world, but it's held together by a trading of information, real information, speculation, wild assertions, all of it's part of the mix. It's a lot of fun, Rita. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell Rita, time me for 15 minutes, stop me from talking, and then I'll answer some questions. I apologize to you first. The Stewardship Council is meeting today and tomorrow in West Sacramento. We're now meeting 4 days a month, and I must scoot off to preside over the meetings. I apologize, I can't stay through the day. Rita asked me to talk about the Delta Plan, and let me just run through some stuff. On your table, or in your material, there is a little pamphlet, and at the risk of asking you to focus on law as opposed to speculation, position, assertions, and political debate, it is in fact a copy of the governance law, one of the 5 bills that the legislature passed as part of their water Delta package in 2009. It is a complex, dense package of bills, but this is also complex and dense too. It's probably worth paying a little bit of attention to it. You don't have to thumb through it, but I'm going to talk about some of the things. The legislation created the Delta Stewardship Council, it created a Delta Conservancy, and so on. The statute tells us to develop, and this is a direct quote, develop, adopt, and commence implementation of the Delta Plan, which is a legally enforceable state regulation, by January 1st, 2012. Water Code Section 85001C. I'd say, I reference that because I spend most of my time listening to people talk, and with the exception of attorneys, my profession, people tend to ignore the law and talk on their policy positions. It's human nature, I understand it, but the laws have a lot to what we do. We are engaged in a complicated process to achieve that. As Rita mentioned, and as many of you know, this is a room full of the usual suspects who get rounded up on police raids of water buffaloes. So many of you know it already, but in case you don't, to get to a implementation date of January 1st and to have a regulation, you must satisfy the California Environmental Quality Act, which we have determined means also an environmental impact report. Plus, we must satisfy the Administrative Procedures Act of the state, all the stuff you do as water managers, for those of you who are water managers. We are having the rough equivalent of 7 staff drafts. The first came out in February. The second came out last week. The third will come out in April. The fourth will come out in May. At that point, the council will approve for circulation the fourth draft and whatever modifications we care to make on it. This is CEQA certification, and as you all know, you have a comment period required by law that must be engaged in. So I think the deadline for printing and the notice is something like June 15th, but in any event, the council will come back for permitted revisions under the law in September, October, and November. So that's the equivalent of the 5th, 6th, and 7th version of the Delta Plan. We will adopt whatever version we're going to adopt in November of this year. It goes off to state agencies for review and all that kind of stuff, and we hope to be able and up and running on January 1st, consistent with the legislation. A lot of people say, well, what do you do? It's another study commission. Well, it is and it isn't. The Delta Stewardship Council is an appellate body for a portion of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. Water Code Section 85320C. The last step in the process under the statute that was passed last year is the Department of Fish and Game makes a determination that Bay Delta Conservation Plan is consistent with the environmental standards placed into law. All this talk about NCCP and HCP and all that is related to the standards that are in law and other terms and conditions the legislature and Governor Schwarzenegger imposed. And it says we're supposed to incorporate it if it meets that test, but then it has this sentence. The Department of Fish and Game's determination that the BDCP has met the requirements of this section may be appealed to the council. Covered actions. The Delta Plan, which is declared in legislation to be legally enforceable by the legislature, that's their intention, creates a series of covered actions. You can find the definition. There's an index we tried to draft for this statute, but a covered action, very complicated. There's some exemptions and exclusions from it. But a covered action is basically a state or a local agency, arguably a private project as well, that meets the test of law. What are the penalties? Everyone says, well, I mean, can you fine people? No, we can't fine people. But the statute says that particularly with regard to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, if BDCP fails to meet the test of law as determined by Fish and Game, or arguably our determination, BDCP, quote, shall not be incorporated in the Delta Plan, and the public benefits associated with BDCP shall not be eligible for state funding. That's what the statute says. There are a lot of other things about reports and reviews and integration and all of that, and incorporations of plans. We were created as an independent agency of state government. Don't ask me why. I didn't write the bill. Don't even ask me precisely what it means to be an independent agency. Ask the water master. He knows all these things. But it led the Attorney General to tell us, well, it doesn't happen very much. But it appeals to me, as many of you who know me might imagine, it appeals to me to be called independent. I kind of like that, and it is attractive. I wanted to talk to you about the second staff draft Delta Plan, and there's much in it. I strongly recommend you read the darn thing, go to our website, everything's published. Start with the second draft, but understand the second draft is our initial cut at regulations and recommendations. Recommendations are not legally enforceable. Regulations would be legally enforceable if done. Enforceable under the definition of the statute. But there's some elements that I think you want to pay attention to. First, on science. Yes, there is a broad, general, and shallow agreement that science is really important. Shallow because, of course, all of us are frustrated when scientists don't tell us exactly what we want to hear. And we are constantly seeking a new wisdom of scientists to tell us what we do want to hear. All people on all sides of the water puzzle seem to have that predilection. The Delta plan and action we took last year in an interim plan the legislature told us to adopt is we have, I believe, the first major definition in regulatory form of best available science. It is a process definition that I'd urge you to take a look at. Very important. And, you know, it's full of observations, but we accumulated the Delta Science Program, which is the successor from CalFed Bay Delta Science Program, accumulated this. They used the best evaluation. None of it will surprise you. That evidence in a public process runs the range in the scientific view from peer review down to opinion. All information must be received in a public process when you make public policy determinations, but at least in terms of trying to evaluate what the best available science is. By the way, we are required to use the best available science. It's appearing in the statute many times. And that being the case, how you define it is really important. And it also becomes important for those of you who have projects that relate in and around the Delta and so on. Number two, everyone believes they are in favor of adaptive management. No one can quite explain what it means, but they're all doing it. Everyone's doing it as best I can understand. You will see in the second draft a chapter done by our lead scientist in the Delta Science Program on adaptive management. Again, trying to give some heft to the understanding. This is important because this is the personal Phil Eisenberg opinion. I'll try to identify those as I go through. Everybody knows that trying to do complicated public works projects by just relying on political speeches is not really the way it works. Speeches are relevant, they're essential, but when you have a complicated engineering, scientific, biological, and contentious public policy issues, you need something other than just speeches. In politics, when I was a politician for a long time, 25 years, I look back on it and I found that even I would constantly say things like, we guarantee that. We guarantee it will rain every year in amounts sufficient to satisfy your demands for water. We guarantee there will never be a drought. We guarantee we will solve the problems of education or health care for all times. Pafooey! That's a scientific tune. Pafooey is a scientific. We can't guarantee what nature provides. We can barely adjust to it when it happens. And the adaptive management is a declaration, hard I think for all of us to deal with, that the world is not perfect and facts are not perfect and ideas may not succeed. And you have to evaluate, study, and change rapidly over time. Why I think that'll make a lot of water project managers uneasy, of course, is the notion of changing what you've spent 25 years to get to and explaining to your ratepayers that a bunch of lunatics are going to be changing all these things as time goes on is a hard sell. I mean, hell, if it's a hard sell to convince your ratepayers to conserve water so they can pay higher fees to justify your budget,